But right now, it sounds like we finally have him. My apologies. We have Dave Brzezinski on the line. Dave, how you doing?
Fantastic, Frank. And like I said, good morning to you. Good morning, Chicago.
Oh, much better. I love it. We can actually hear you. This is awesome. Hey.
Well, it's about time you paid your bills.
you know, and don't think I won't take that to the program director. It's about time. Hey, Dave, you know, for people that may not know, at one time, there used to be anywhere from 8 to 15 different wrestling magazines where people could go get their information from. I sorely miss those days, Dave.
Oh, who doesn't? I mean, going back to like probably the premier wrestling magazine of its day, Wrestling Review, which started in 1959, and when I was a young kid of 14 years old, I started writing stories and taking pictures for that magazine back in 1968.
Wow.
Up until the time I became a manager in 1974. And then many, many years later, Wrestling Review ceased to sort of exist in its regular form. And Brian Bucantis, a good friend of mine here from Detroit, bought the magazine back in 2002, I think it was, and he revived it, and we made it just a magazine of old school wrestling.
You know, magazines like, and again, this is, you know, the WWE buying everything, basically being the only game in town, unfortunately. But I would run to my corner magazine store every month to get the Wrestling Eye, the Wrestling Observer, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I mean, I couldn't get enough information about what was going on in other territories. And I'm assuming, Dave, you were the same way. You needed to know what was going on in Puerto Rico at World Wrestling Council. You needed to know what was going on in Mexico in AAA. You needed to know what was going on in Japan. Am I right?
Oh, when I was a young kid, God, my life just consisted of wrestling, you know, going to school and stuff like that. You know, you sort of didn't want to bring it up to the other kids in school because they'd either mock you or you'd get your butt kicked, you know, but every Saturday, you know, every other Saturday here in Detroit, you know, the wrestling mecca, really, Detroit's Cobo Arena, yeah, I'd, you know, take a bus, go downtown, and the place where it left me off at my bus stop, at the last stop, there was and this was in the days where you had newsstands all around downtown areas.
Yep.
And sure enough, I'd get off that thing, I'd look for the Wrestling Review, Wrestling World, the Bill Apter magazines, just anything that had wrestling on it, I bought it.
And for people that may not know, you said you went on to manage starting in '74. You were known as the Supermouth, Dave Drason. Now, how... again, wrestling's always. I always find it funny how people come up with their gimmick names. How did you come up with the Supermouth, Dave Drason, or was it given to you?
Sort of half and half. When I first started, my very first matches here, I managed a very brief period. I managed a beautiful Ben Justice. And because I was the photographer at Cobo Arena at the time, everybody knew who I was in the area. So the Sheik, who was promoting here, he really couldn't just have, you know, the photographer go out there as a manager, you know. So they put me under a mask, and I went as the Scholar for 3 matches, and you know, over a course of a week or so.
Right.
And then I just didn't get another opportunity at that. Sheik didn't know what to do. So it happened at the time when a lot of the guys in the Detroit territory, like Killer Brooks, Tony Marino, Ben Justice, Louis Martinez, and that, formed their own group going against the Sheik, and they called me up, gave me an opportunity, and I had to come up with a name. And, you know, I always wanted to be a manager. And, you know, what name was I going to have? And I was out in L.A. Working for the office out there at one point, and there was a young wrestler out there named Rick Drason, but he spelled his D-R-A-S-I-N. And I thought, I was really impressed with this guy, and I said, man, if I became a manager, Dave Drason, but I'll have to switch it. So I changed the spelling, and that's the way it came about with the Dave Drason name. But then when I started working for George Cannon's group up in Canada, yeah, I could rant and rave on the microphone and stuff like that. And one of my wrestlers at the time says, "Oh, this guy's a superstar." And Milta Bruskin, who was the color commentary with George Cannon, says he's not a superstar, he's a supermouth. And from that day on, that's how I got that nickname.
Hey, now, I gotta say this, Dave. I find old school wrestling to be so compelling. One, because it was so secretive. It was kayfabe. It wasn't public knowledge that heels and faces could actually be friends. Do you have a story of how heels were heels and faces were faces, and you could not mingle out in public? Do you have any stories like that?
Oh, tons of stories like that. Yeah, it was just frowned upon, and really, depending on the territory, Detroit was pretty loose. After Cobo Arena shows, most of the wrestlers stayed at a hotel in town here called the Sheraton Cadillac. And after the, Cobo bouts, everybody would meet in the hotel bar there. And, some guys, I mean, they didn't sit next to each other with their arms around each other, but they were in the same room together. And it was a lot of the hardcore wrestling fans were there, so they saw that kind of stuff. Any other things like, a lot of times we rode together. Mm-hmm. Going to Toronto or different shows. But what you'd have to do is drop off somebody like a block or two from the arena so that the fans wouldn't see you, together.
That's amazing. I just find that amazing. Now, Juice Man, you're a tad bit younger than I, but I know you love wrestling as well. Dude, you got a legend here on the phone that's been around and seen it all. You got a question for Dave?
Oh man, Dave.
Hey, he's frozen, Dave.
I'm frozen right
he's
now.
just listening to your stories.
First of all, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Inside the Square Circle right now with Frankie Rodriguez. Dave Brzezinski on the line. Dave, I'd actually like to know. Explain the traveling as far as like what was that like back in the day?
Oh, it was brutal. The Detroit territory wasn't as bad as some. I mean, it's always been discussed. What was the worst territory? They said Leroy McGirt's territory in Oklahoma was the worst because you had to drive, clear across that whole state, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and sometimes, you'd be in Oklahoma City one day, you'd be in Baton Rouge, for a afternoon match, TV or something. So that was one of the bad territories. But back in the day, we didn't fly everywhere like they did, like they do today.
Exactly.
Typically in Detroit here, Detroit was on a Saturday night. Either you'd go up to Toronto for Frank Tunney's promotion on Sunday, and then you had Dayton, Ohio on Monday. Tuesday you could be, just anywhere. Back in Michigan, usually. Thursdays was Toledo, then you had Akron, Canton, other shows in Canada, other shows throughout Michigan. So you put a lot of miles on a car. Wow. Back in the day, I mean, that's the way you did it. You drove. And a lot of times after the matches, you drove from one town to the next. And, driving with some of the guys and being a young kid as I was, and I didn't drink or anything like that, after the shows, these guys would have like a case of beer or a fifth of whiskey, and they're drinking and driving, and it's like, they're professionals. I thought it was okay, but nowadays it's like, God, I'm glad I was able to live through all that.
So everybody, like explain, Dave, if you can you explain to the audience, like just the time, like say like after the show ends, then the wrestlers go into the bar, then the time when they're driving to when they actually get to their next destination. Time-wise, as far as what time of the day did you leave? What time did you arrive?
Well,
wow.
Let's see. I'll just take, Detroit, Toronto as an example.
Uh-huh.
You'd get out of the Detroit Cobo show maybe 11:30. And in the days when the Sheik had his mobile TV truck, everybody had to stay around and film promos for the territory for the next 2 weeks. So you could be there till 1 o'clock in the morning. And then, you'd go over to the Sheraton Cadillac, have a couple drinks and stuff, go to bed. Then next day, you'd get up early in the morning, drive to Toronto, do that. After the Toronto show was over, we came right back home. So we wouldn't get out of, Toronto till, maybe midnight. Because maybe if the show ended at 11, Frank Tunney always had food and drinks for the boys in his office at the Maple Leaf Gardens there. So guys would, have some drinks, get some food, and we head on back, and that's another 4-hour drive. So we'd get home like 4 or 5 in the morning.
Wow, that is insane.
Yeah, Dave, it really is amazing. Now, you managed the original Sheik, who, by wrestling standards, his character was crazy, out there, challenge anybody, wasn't afraid of nobody, hardcore before hardcore was even a term. Now, did you find it harder to protect his gimmick and character than other wrestlers?
Definitely. When I'll start with other wrestlers first, like when I managed Killer Brooks or the Fabulous Kangaroos and Ben Justice, and I managed so many guys over the course of my career. Going out with those guys was fun.
Right.
It was a lot looser. We can, mess around at the ring. When the manager tells a guy something, he's not telling them, I'm not telling them, what move to make in the ring. It may appear that way, to the fans, but it's like, hey, look at this old broad with the beard or something, or it's like, man, could you believe the looks on this guy? What the heck is this old grandpa doing with this young gal? So we, look in the audience and, make cracks like that. And it's like, you always tried to crack each other up. It's like, you can't break that, start laughing up at the ring, but boy, we certainly tried. So it was fun with those guys. Now, when I became the manager of the Sheik, which was the greatest experience of my life and greatest thrill, because I've always been a Sheik fan and I worked for him as photographer and writing the Body Press program and stuff. But when you went out with him, he had this mystique and, you almost knew what had to be done. You took it very serious. You didn't want to mess up when you were out there with him because, boy, you don't want a Sheik repercussion, I'll tell you that. And, you just did things right. You got your heat. You didn't draw the heat away from him at all. You knew when to take your spots, and it was just a lot more serious, And I always said that, it was always the 2 longest walks of my career. One, to walk to the ring, and the longest one was getting back to the dressing room safely with him.
It was back then. There was no railings, no barricades. It was a fight for your life. If and your job as a heel a lot of times was to start a mini riot. So it was a lot of times a fight for your life, wasn't it, Dave?
Oh, definitely. I've been punched, kicked, spit upon, stuff thrown at, stabbed once, and depending on the arena, sometimes there was like 8 to 10 feet between you and, the first row, and sometimes they were like a foot away from you. You barely had enough room to walk or move.
Oh,
so you really had to be careful of what kind of heat that you got in, certain cities. You always had to walk on eggshells because fans, their idea was, they can sit in the audience and yell and scream and say whatever they want to the guys that are inside the ring. Mm-hmm. But now you're a manager outside, and you're an easy target, and you're easy to get to. And a lot of times we were, and it wasn't only me. I remember Abdullah Farouk and Eddie Creechman and Gary Hart, some of the greatest managers of all time. They'll have, each one of them will have horror stories about getting hit or something, or interacting with the fans outside the ring.
Dave, you know what I loved right now having you on the show. I love this, dude. Anyone that can bring up Eddie Creechman or Gary Hart, you're A-okay in my book, because those are 2 of the top guys I absolutely loved to hate when I was a kid. I hated both of them.
I loved them. Even though when I watched wrestling as a kid, I always felt that the managers really brought something extra to the table.
Yes.
They were heat magnets. And that was their job. But when they can go on TV and say the things that they did to promote, the next show or to promote their guy, that's what I really love to focus on. And when I was a kid growing up, God, I was like giant Q-tip if you put white hat and white boots on me. I was so skinny. So I never had aspirations of being a wrestler because I was always so small.
Uh-huh.
So I always had, this great desire to be a wrestling manager, and, fortunately, my dreams came true.
Dave, you just mentioned something that's just great because we're talking about managers. Like, my first, like, do you are you up to date with the wrestling today?
Not really. I try not to watch it. It's a different brand.
Yeah.
A lot of old school, wrestling fans and stuff, on message boards and stuff, just say that they can't stand it. I hate it. I hate the Vince McMahon product. I do too. But every sport changes.
Yes.
You got to look at football. It was only 20, 30 years ago that football, the first two plays were running plays, and then you had a pass play. It was almost a given. Now you've got, the guys passing and stuff. The game's more exciting. Same thing with baseball. Baseball was just so slow back in the day. Now you got all these, big hitters and, pitchers with these bionic arms, and same thing with basketball. Basketball, look at the 50s and the 60s.
Oh, boy.
When there was a set shot. It wasn't even a jump shot back then.
Right.
I agree.
So, things evolve. And, a lot of people like the old way. And, it's hard for them to grasp the new and the better. And, same thing with wrestling. But, right now, even though it's new, I don't think the product is better.
No, it's not.
You don't have heels and baby faces anymore. The fans are cheering the heels. Look at John Cena. They're dissing on that guy, and he's the baby face.
Right.
I agree.
Right.
So you never know how can you build any kind of heat with a heel and and the fans liking a baby face at all. Like,
Yeah.
just ridiculous.
Hey, Dave,
they're not telling stories anymore in the ring.
Dave, and you know what? I think another part of that is the WWE doesn't have any managers to help these guys get over who can't communicate the storyline, who don't know how to talk on a mic. Being the mouthpiece as you were for so many managers, you had to get the storyline over and to relay to people what was going on that night, because that's how you guys got paid. You talked asses into seats.
That's exactly what you had to do. You had to talk it up. You had to make it sound bigger than life, and to get people to come and see it. Sometimes you had to say the most ridiculous thing that people would be sitting there and listen to you saying, "Oh, I can't believe that," But it's stuck in their head what you said. Mm-hmm. And then, it's like, "Oh, I'm going to go see him get his butt kicked. He's got something coming to him." And that's what you had to do. Now, they don't have any wrestling managers today, but I guess they could bring it. I mean, I could come back if WWE gives me a 38 double D boob job or something. That's the only way wrestling managers are ever going to come back in this business.
Man, you're right on.
Amen.
Hey, Dave, another question. One of my favorite wrestling movies of all time was an independent film that came from the Sheik called I Like to Hurt People. Did you have anything to do with that?
No, I was around. It was my last year or so as photographer for the Sheik at that time when they were filming. That filming wasn't done just, say, over like a 6-month period. That was done over like a 2-3 year period. And when they really started to put the whole thing together toward the end, I had already gone and onto my career as a manager, and that was when they started bringing in Dusty Rhodes and Ock Baker, and the territory was really going down, and they barely able to get a couple thousand people into the Cobo Arena in those days.
Now I got to believe, with you being in Detroit, you've had to venture down to Chicago. Do you have any fond memories here in our fair city of wrestling events?
Oh, I love Chicago. Yeah, I mean, those were the days when, Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher and Blackjacks and Bobby Heenan, and, you had a great territory there.
Yeah.
And it was, the thing I loved about it is because there was guys there that you didn't get to see in, Detroit here. And the same thing. There was so many, the wrestling magazines of the day, which you brought up earlier, just, reading these things, and you read about guys and their gimmicks and stuff like that, like, oh God, I was just so scared of, like, the interns down in the Atlanta territory. They were so big, and, you'd see the things that they did in the wrestling magazines, and it's like, it'd almost scare you. Oh, please don't come up to Detroit here. I don't want to see you guys. And then, other guys like Buddy Rogers.
Man.
He was just one of my favorites, and I never even saw the guy. It was just, everything that I read and saw from the magazines. So the same kind of thing, in Chicagoland there, Bob Luce put on, great shows, and, it's, from the guys that I, saw in the wrestling magazines that I just had to go see. Even though Dick the Bruiser was big here in Detroit, in the mid-'60s, early and mid-'60s, but then he got banned from Michigan after his brouhaha with Alex Karras, and, he wasn't able to come back for many years. So Chicago was the place to go see, Dick the Bruiser.
Yeah, Dick Afflis, Dick the Bruiser, Bob Luce, Vern Gagne. They really had a really good thing going on here in Chicago. And I feel very fortunate to be able to have gone to the amphitheater and the Rosemont Horizon and the UIC Pavilion, the Hammond Civic Center to go see some of these legends perform. I got to ask you, Dave, and then we got to get into your books and stuff like that. Did you watch from afar somebody and say, man, I really wish I could have managed that guy?
Oh, God. Well, when I was down in Charlotte, North Carolina, I had been managing for about a year or so then. And a good friend of mine who worked up here was working down there at Sonny King.
Oh, yeah.
So he invited me down there. He says, come on down here. I'll try to get you in, the Crockett territory as a manager. And they really didn't use managers at that time. But, Sonny plugged it away for me. And, unfortunately, I never was able to crack it down there.
Right.
But it was my first opportunity to be with Ric Flair. And, he had been in the business for probably about 2-3 years at that time. He went from the AWA down to the NWA in the Charlotte territory. And I tell you, and I had, another good photographer friend of mine was Gene Gordon.
Uh-huh.
And, I'd go over Gene's house all the time. And, Ric Flair, lived close by, so we'd go over his house and we'd talk. And, he was a great inspiration for me. I told him I was a manager and stuff, and told him the Sheik, and he wasn't too familiar with the Sheik, but he said, just keep going, keep plugging, don't give up, and, things will happen for you. And so I really would have loved to have managed Ric Flair on a full-time basis.
Yeah, and you know what, Dave, there's a lot of people that have said a lot of things about Ric Flair, but I will tell you this, in my lifetime, and I'm a 40-year-old man. Ric Flair is, in my lifetime, the real world heavyweight champion. I mean, he was the road traveling that he had to endure to go to territory to make people who probably shouldn't have been in the ring with him, make them look good. So for the next time he comes back, they sell out the building. I think Ric Flair is the man when it comes to pro wrestling.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, that guy gave 110% every time he walked through those ropes, whether there was 20 people in that crowd or 20,000. And like you said, he could make a broomstick look good in the ring. God, he all-time greatest as far as I'm concerned, wrestler-wise. As far as heel and stuff, Sheik, no doubt.
Yep.
Greatest of all time.
Now, Dave, you've written a couple books, I understand. What are the titles? What are they called?
It's called This Saturday Night, and it's in conjunction with Brian Buchanan Wrestling Review magazine. The very first one came out about 5-6 years ago, and it's basically a photo history of all the Detroit wrestlers in the wrestling heyday here. And the new one, we just came out with it last week. It's been a labor of love. We had been talking about doing this for about 3 years, and I had some of my old photographs when, I was the photographer for the Sheik here.
Sure.
And it's like, I've got this stuff. And he goes, let's put another book together. So right about a year ago, it's like we were ready to, put this thing together. And I was getting ready to go out to the CAC, Cauliflower Alley Club in Vegas last year. And some of my good old buddies were going to be there, like Jimmy Valiant and Terry Funk and things like that. And they, contacted me before I was coming out and asked if I, had any old stuff on them. So I went down to my basement, where I've got all my wrestling stuff. And it's like I started digging, and there was this one box that I noticed there before, and I know a couple things that are on top of it, but I just never went in it. And so for the heck of it, I said, let's see what's in this thing. And lo and behold, it was, I hit the mother lode. It was all my negatives from when I was the photographer for the Sheik.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, like a day before we were ready to put this thing, out, it's like, stop the presses. This is what I found. And the gems that I found, that, everything from, in-ring action to dressing room shots to candid things that were never meant to be, seen by the public. I mean, like the Sheik and Sam Muchnick shaking hands and talking to each other. And, I've got a few things in the book that can't be in the book. Just say one with Tony Marino and Bobo Brazil. Bobo Brazil sitting in the dressing room naked, putting his boots on, and Tony Marino grabbing, his schmengi.
That's classic right there.
Things like, I've got Killer Brooks coming out of the shower, and Pompero Firpo taking the leak, and, Dr. Jerry Graham, oh, God, you don't want to know about that photograph. But, things like that, they, here I was a 16-year-old kid that, gained the trust of these guys, and, I held on to this stuff, until this day, and nobody ever saw it. And now, things are coming out to the light of day on this. But the book itself, it's called This Saturday Night 2, Return to the Kobo, and it's 240 pages of basically photographs and memorabilia. And it's like, the best of the photographs that I had, and each one is captioned, so it's like, not only are you, is it a photo book, but you also got to read, to read,
Sure.
It's a historical time of, when I was the photographer there. And, it's not only, the photographs, but, we've got clippings from the Detroit area and results, things that used to appear in the paper, and photographs of, some of the gimmick things that, like the fabulous kangaroos boomerangs that they used to throw out into the crowd, and pennants, and I've got a envelope, from, the Sheik, his business card.
Right.
Even friends of mine, band here in Detroit, Horse Cave Trio, they did last year, a film producer, Mark Novotarski, came out with a 2-disc DVD called The Sheik, Wrestling Greatest Villain. So it's a documentary on the Sheik, and included in it, good friends of mine, a band here in Detroit, Horse Cave Trio, did a song called I Am the Sheik. And me and Brian are getting ready to try to put a video along with that song together. But, it's a great book. Even I'm excited about, looking at it.
I can't wait, Dave. You've got me hook, line, and sinker. Like I said, I love old school wrestling, and to have the things that you found, like you said, that's just wrestling gold. How do people go about getting your book, Dave?
They can go to WrestlePrints.com, WrestlePrints.com, and you can go on there. The book is $29.95, but we got it for $24.95 for the early buyers. And if you go to that website now, you can also see the video that we put together of some of the teaser photographs and things that are in it, and it's just a fun video to watch, and it gives you a glimpse of what's going to be in the book, but it doesn't even scratch the surface of what's in this thing.
Man, Dave, we're up against the break. If you're ever back in the Chicagoland area, you've got the red carpet to come into studio. I would love the opportunity to have you in here for a show and just talk old school wrestling. man, I could talk to you for hours, Dave, I'm sure, and we still wouldn't scratch the surface.
No, and all the radio shows and friends that I know of, they say, yeah, you're not known as the Supermouth for nothing, because I could talk to you for hours on that show.
But it's so smooth, though, Dave. It's like, I'm so interested, Dave.
Yeah, you got the young guy, Juice Man, here. You got him interested. You know, he thinks old school is like Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat '89. You know.
Well, that happened to me, every so often. I've got guys who come up to me and, know that I was in the business and stuff like that. And they're younger guys, and they go, oh, man, that's right. And they go, yeah, I was into it, when it was old school, too. And it's like, oh, yeah, really? They go, oh, yeah, Jake the Snake and Randy Macho. Get out of here.
Dave, you're awesome. Do you have a Facebook or Twitter, or are you into any of that you want to tell people about?
No, I don't do that, but you go to Kayfabe Memories. I have been posting for almost the last year a photo of the day. And it's just, other photos that aren't in the book, and, I post a photograph, and probably the most visited site these days, and people, friends and wrestling fans say the first thing that they do is get up in the morning, go to Kayfabe Memories to see what photo of the day I got listed up there. And it's a great way. There's a lot of old school wrestlers that are still on there, and post on different threads, and it goes back to the territory days. And, they have Detroit and Toronto, Montreal, Atlanta. Every territory that existed back in the old school day, there's threads on there that you can, talk to other people about.
And that's a website, kayfabememories.com?
Yep.
Hey, Dave, again, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, go get the book at WrestlePrince.com. This stuff is gold. You're not going to find this anywhere. This isn't something you're going to be able to go on the internet and pull off. This is wrestling tradition at its finest. And Dave, it has been a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, thanks for having me, and I can't wait to get back to Chicago and go to Shaw's Crab House and get some good pizza somewhere and go see a Cubs game and hopefully meet you guys in person, come on your show, and entertain the wrestling fans, the old school way.
Absolutely. Again, Dave, you've got the red carpet. It's been an honor. You have yourself a great day, my friend.